New background. I like it. What do you think? Leave me a comment. Hello everyone and welcome back to Pokexplanations, the show where of course I talk about how the world would be and how our lives would change if Pokemon really existed. This is of course the super special episode that I promised you guys, so let us begin with the subjects of interest. We have, of course, Eevee, Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon, Espeon, Umbreon, Leafeon, Glaceon. In that order. So let us begin with the Eevee. Now for its descriptions. Red and blue versions, the originals. Its genetic code is irregular. It may mutate if it is exposed to radiation from elemental stone. Yellow version. Its genetic code is unstable, so it could evolve in a variety of ways. There are only a few alive. Gold version. It has the ability to alter the composition of its body to suit its surrounding environment. And at last, Platinum. Because its genetic makeup is irregular, it quickly changes its form due to a variety of causes. Alright, so we know that really Eevee isn't a Pokemon that would be life-changing. No, what I want to talk about is how it changes itself. Because I'm sure, like a lot of people, I was under the impression that Eevee could only change forms based on exposure to the elemental stones, which we just read, and exposure to max happiness in sunlight and moonlight. But it turns out that was incorrect. No, it turns out Eevee is a lot more like a Ditto. It just doesn't show it, and hasn't really been shown in the anime or the games that much, but more so in these descriptions. In the red, blue, and yellow descriptions, we read that Eevee can evolve, yes, by the elemental stones. And this is very true. That's how it evolves. That is the most common way it evolves in the games, in the anime, is someone uses like a fire stone or a leaf stone or a water stone on it, and it evolves. But what we got from the gold and platinum descriptions was that Eevee can change its form pretty much at will. And I say at will, but in all reality it would probably take several weeks. But we can't really know that because the Pokemon Company has not disclosed that kind of information and probably will not. Now, the way I see it is that Eevee is kind of the cross between a Ditto and a Kecleon. It's a shapeshifter, but it's more for camouflage rather than its overall form. Eevee will change its shape and colorings and whatever to match its current environment. And that's about it. Now what I see this as is Eevee is kind of the cross between a Ditto and a Kecleon. Eevee can change its shape at will, but it's more for camouflage, and I'm not really sure if it can change back into its regular Eevee form or not, because we've only ever witnessed it changing by elemental stone or sunlight and moonlight. So that's still a possibility. We've got to keep that in mind. Now, the platinum description states that Eevee can quickly change its forms to a variety of causes based on its current environment. So yes, it is more like a Kecleon, as in it does not go for offense very much, as we'll probably notice in Leafeon later. I'll get to that. But it's more for camouflage. So to summarize Eevee, no, it wouldn't really be world-changing. There's the possibility now that because Eevee has such a low impact and can hide itself so well, there's the possibility that Eevee could already exist, if we'd like to think about it like that. So let's get away from Eevee for a moment and let's speak of its first evolution, Vaporeon. It's a water type, so I'm going to drink this water before I get into its descriptions. Delicious. Red and blue versions, the originals. It lives close to water. Its long tail is ridged with a fin which is often mistaken for a mermaid's. Yellow version. Its structure is similar to water molecules. It will melt away and become invisible in water. Now onto that there gold version. When Vaporeon's fins begin to vibrate, it is a sign that rain will come within a few hours. And the latest game that gives us new information, Ruby. Vaporeon underwent a spontaneous mutation and grew fins and gills that allow it to live underwater. This Pokemon can freely control water. Alright, so starting at the red and blue descriptions, this Pokemon solidifies its place in mythology with the mermaid. So let's say Vaporeon was one of those Pokemon that was around with, Cranidos and Omastar and Aerodactyl and all those fossil Pokemon, and it survived underwater long enough for humans to evolve and see it. And they're out in their boats one day or offshore, and they look out and they see something. They're like, "Hey, what's that?" Yelling at one another, saying, come here, look at this, look at this. And they're like, what? And they see it jump out of the water. That's whoosh. And it's got kind of a human looking figure to it at that time. We don't know, or it's way off in the distance and that's what they think it is. But they kind of get close enough to it and all they see is this fish tail. Mermaid. That's how I see that happen. The yellow description will kind of add on to that, seeing as it can freely control water, and so it melts itself into the water using its unstable cell structure, or I guess stable and controllable cell structure at this point. It melts itself into the water and becomes completely invisible. At that point, it is the water. So you cannot find this Pokemon that further solidifies itself into the mermaid myth. The gold and ruby descriptions really are the descriptions that throw this Pokemon for a loop. Because you see, the gold description says it can predict weather, which I'm thinking, my first thought was, oh hey, that's where they got the basis for cast form, and I'm probably right. So it'd be a neat Pokemon to have for the fact that its fins vibrate when it's about to rain, and yeah, I could go with that. That would be where Vaporeon would really become a world changer, because you would have weather institutions with these Pokemon, let's say meteorologists, and they need to know when it's about to rain, and they can tell go Pokeball and throw their Vaporeon out there. But this meteorologist can throw their Pokeball down and set Vaporeon out and walk over and feel its fins, and if they're vibrating, they have a better reading on when it's about to rain. We can more accurately predict weather, strong weather events, and I could see this potentially saving a few lives. Let's say you get a really heavy rain that's going to cause massive flooding, just wash out a valley somewhere. A Vaporeon will be able to tell you, hey, it's going to rain here soon, y'all better GTFO. So to summarize Vaporeon's effect on our world, it would be very useful to meteorologists and storm predictors, just for those facts that it can predict the weather. And you'll hear a little later on that a couple other of Eevee's evolutions can predict the weather as well. So stay tuned for that. But now we move on to the Jolteon. Hey, that rhymed. And I'm just going to warn you guys ahead of time. There is a lot of information on Jolteon here. So get comfortable if you want to watch this part. If not, there should be links somewhere over here. If there's not, you're watching the video too early and you cannot skip this. So, in the words of the one Simpsons character whose name I can never remember. But now we move on to the red and blue descriptions. It accumulates negative ions in the atmosphere to blast out 10,000 volt lightning bolts. I know this thing was a star of Pokemon Yellow, but I don't think it really stands much of a chance against Jolteon. So let's move on to there. A sensitive Pokemon that easily becomes sad or angry. Every time its mood changes, it charges power. Pokemon Silver. Every hair on its body starts to stand sharply on end if it becomes charged with electricity. Crystal. The negatively charged ions generated in its fur create a constant sparking noise. Emerald version. Its cells generate weak power that is amplified by its fur's static electricity to drop thunderbolts. The bristling fur is made of electrically charged needles. Fire Red. If it is angered or startled, the fur all over its body bristles like sharp needles that pierce foes. Platinum. If agitated, it uses electricity to straighten out its fur and launch it in small bunches. So Jolteon kind of retains that same unstable cell structure that the original Eevee form had, but is not so much for transformation as it is for energy storage. These cells, I would assume, both in its skin and more importantly in its fur, are used for storing negative ions, as we just read. And from what we just read as well, its cells naturally charge power, just a small amount, so it can release small electrical shocks and I would assume turn its fur into the needles we just heard about. From what we've seen so far, Jolteon is more of a hunter, but is also at the same time very defensive. So it's a defensive hunter type of Pokemon. It's able to release just horribly powerful thunderbolts from its cells and its fur and everything by releasing that energy, but it also has a defense mechanism of its fur from being able to spike them up and make them apparently very sharp needles, which would prevent it from being bitten or otherwise physically harmed. So, thumbs up to you, Jolteon. The bristled up fur it gets when it's agitated in the slightest, because it seems like a very temperamental Pokemon. Can apparently be launched in small bunches. That's where it learns Pin Missile and tons of other launching attacks like that, which is very interesting. Unfortunately, it gets rid of that defense mechanism unless the hair just grows back instantly, because it's generated by an electric charge is not actually fur in the first place. And something I'm just personally curious about is, does it have the same ability that we just talked about Vaporeon having, being able to predict the weather? Because it seems like a Jolteon would be able to predict thunderstorm, which would be very, very useful. So to summarize Jolteon and having a world-changing effect, I'm going to have to say that it's in the same boat with Vaporeon. It would be more useful to have for predicting the weather, if it can indeed do that. Otherwise, I don't see it being useful to anything other than itself. It's not a very powerful hunter, it's just defensive. So it's not going to attack humans, it's just very territorial. I would say it would have, now discounting the weather of course, it wouldn't have any bigger effect on our world than just a regular wolf would today. So let's move from Jolteon to Flareon. Now its definitions. We begin with red and blue version. When storing thermal energy in its body, its temperature could soar to over 1600 degrees. And you'll see this number kind of move around, anywhere between 1600 degrees and 1700 degrees. So 1700 degrees comes from crystal. It did have information, but that's why I'm not going over it. So heads up. Yellow version. It has a flame chamber inside its body. It inhales, then blows out fire that is over 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. Yowza. Silver. It fluffs out its fur collar to cool down its body's temperature, which can reach 1650 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire red version. Fire red version does have new information about the Pokemon, but it's really just an expansion of what yellow version stated with the fire it produces. And it varies by about 100 degrees, from 3000 degrees to from 3100 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Let me be just real with you guys for a moment. Now, I'm going to say right off that I've never taken a drug. I've never used what I'm about to talk about. So, correct me if I'm wrong, please, some stoner dude in my audience. Flareon seems like it would be a living bong. And hear me out for just a minute. Assuming it eats the same way, you could feed it the plant, and assuming that it takes in water the same way that other living creatures do, which I would assume it would, you could have it drink, and that water would go into the fire chamber in what I would assume would be its stomach, and it would heat the water and produce steam, and then cool itself down through its fur collar. So could you not just sit there and kind of huff its fur collar and get high off of that? I really think way too much about these Pokemon. But no. In all seriousness, that was about the only way I could see Flareon being useful, unfortunately. There are a lot of other means, but I mean, let's say it's used in cooking. Unless it is able to openly control the temperature of the fire it creates, it could just singe food, so it wouldn't really be useful there. So to summarize Flareon, no. I don't think it would have a really world-changing effect, but I mean, a fire Pokemon would kind of have to have anyway, because you know, you have the possibility of one getting upset and starting a major forest fire, burning down cities, and that gets more common the more powerful the flame they can produce. So you really have to be careful about that. So that's going to be our rule about fire Pokemon, is that you just have to be careful about them. And with the summary of Flareon, this concludes part 1 of the 2-part super special episode. Thank you guys for the last episode of Pokexplanations reaching 60 views in under 24 hours. So if you'd like to see part 2, please click anywhere on this side of the video. There will be links over here, I hope so, throughout the entire video where you may skip sections, because I know these may be kind of long-winded, and I want to have you kind of pick out your favorite Eeveelution if you just want to listen to that one. Thank you for watching part 1. I will see you in part 2, I hope.